Okay, so that's the last interview. Paul?
Right. So we've all got the standard Chambers interview mark scheme in front of us, and as you'll all we've done loads of these, so you all know this, but it's divided into two sections rather. The first one is debate, his opening performance really, and we've got to mark that. I'm going to ask for your marks out of 25. We can briefly discuss it, but the questions: was there a clear structure, definition, setting out key points? Was his argument persuasive? How did he respond to intervention or questions? And how did he present in terms of oral advocacy? That is, for example, reliance on notes, tone of voice, pacing. Shall I give you my quick notes on that, and then we'll go around? Clear structure. I thought actually he did have a clear structure, and to be honest, wasn't dissuaded from it or deflected from it. Was his argument persuasive? Yes, I think he was reasonably persuasive. He chose a side. We don't have to agree with it, but I thought he made a persuasive argument. I thought he fell down on responding to interventions. I don't think he came back and dealt with mine. And although he had a clear structure, the downside to that was that he stuck with his very sort of micro examples of, the economy taking a tank, and didn't really deal with the major questions. But having said that, he had a nice tone of voice. He didn't rush it. So overall, I was reasonably impressed. James, perhaps you next.
Sure. I agree with what you said on so I'm just looking at my notes, which is why I'm looking off the screen, with structure and persuasive-ness. I guess for me, the style was okay, but maybe there was a bit of a lack of energy there. I found it a bit kind of dull. That's understandable because he's a guy coming for interview and he doesn't necessarily have that experience. But that's how it struck me. There was that question you asked Paul that he said he'd come back to, and I don't think he did. And when I asked a question, I kind of hinted that he hadn't come back to it, and he still didn't. And we all know that answering questions is difficult. But I guess everyone's got to be judged by the marking scheme, haven't they? So I have kind of done him down a bit for that. But overall, I thought it was good. I was a little. I know we've got to talk about the other bit later on. I felt he was more animated when we were talking about his CV, and you could see a real energy in him then, and he hadn't managed to translate that across into his presentation. So he's got potential, but it didn't come across initially.
Francis?
Yes, I'd say that I've made similar notes, really. For example, that he battered off the question that you asked. But I have noted what he brought up in subsequent question, that he was trying to argue the more contentious side of things. I think he made a good attempt at that. I thought his tone was very fluid, but yeah, quite monotone. So a broadly average performance, I think.
And Natasha, perhaps you next.
Yeah, I think I agree with everybody's comments. I think he had a very clear structure. He was relatively persuasive. I'm looking at it on a more objective standpoint, because of course it's quite a controversial topic. His responses to interventions was not very good. And given the fact that he knew he was arguing a side which would be very difficult to argue, I would have hoped that he would have fully prepped the answer to those obvious questions that we were asking. In respect of his advocacy, I agree. It was monotone, it lacked energy, and it was also very dull.
And Ruth?
Thank you again. I agree with the majority of the comments. I'll just look at a couple of other aspects in terms of his timing. I think he put a heavy emphasis on the first part. He actually outlined and highlighted what he would talk about, which was fantastic. But then he spent the majority of his time talking about the first half that he had outlined. Also, his reliance on notes were over a screen, so he may have had them somewhere quite inconspicuous, but it wasn't obvious that he was relying on notes, and so that helped his argument to be more fluid and more persuasive. Again, I agree with all the comments about his tone and his enthusiasm, but overall, considering he chose the harder topic, I think he was quite persuasive. There could have been a method to his madness, but to me it shows that he's not one to turn away from a challenge.
And Laura?
Interestingly, I actually wasn't very impressed with that at all. I don't think he really answered the question, which was about people's rights. I think I see the point he was trying to get to with the economy, but I don't think he actually made the link back to the topic he was asked to actually debate. And I've noted the same thing as Ruth. If you've got a two-part question, he really only got onto the second part of the question with about 30 seconds left. So actually, I wasn't particularly impressed. However, I actually thought the tone was good. I thought the pace was good. At the beginning, I really thought we were going to get something very impressive given with how he laid it out. But actually, I was fundamentally disappointed, I'm afraid.
So I don't know whether you want to add anything.
Saha, your microphone is on mute at the moment.
Thanks, Laura. On timing, I think he ran over and he still didn't conclude, which is pretty criminal. And I think also your question and James's were wholly legitimate questions, but could have been adequately dealt with if he'd provided proper definitions at the outset. Yes, he set out his stall, but he could have dealt with what intolerable means, what erosion means, and we could have avoided that whole debacle. His tone was okay. He didn't blow me out of the water, but there's potential.
I wanted to add something actually about tone, because I think there is a sense in which, because it's being conducted as it must be over the internet, that perhaps that changes people's ability to really interact and build rapport in a way they might do face to face. And I think that ought to be taken into account, actually.
Okay, well, look, should we get the marks for section 1 first then? So this was his debate performance. There's a total mark of 20, total out of 25, and the structure is a mark towards 25 is significantly exceeding expectations. 20, he has exceeded expectations. 15 meets expectations. 10 underperforms. 5 significantly underperforms. So I'll try and do this in the same order, but forgive me if I don't. James first.
Look, I find this really difficult. I sound like one of those Strictly Come Dancing judges or something like that. But I've wavered between a 14 and a 15, and I've crossed it out and then written it down, crossed it out and written it down. But I'm going to plump with the 14 actually.
And Francis.
I went for 15.
Natasha.
I went for 14.
Ruth.
15 again.
Laura.
12, unfortunately.
That was very harsh. And Saha?
You lot are all very harsh. I gave him 17.
Okay, well, I was probably a bit soft on him. I gave him a 15 actually. So we're all not far apart except for one. He's a bit harsher than the others. Okay, right. So that's debate. Application. Again, out of 25, same structure. Things to consider. How did the candidate respond to challenges about their academic background, stroke personal interest? Well, I don't think we asked him anything about his personal interest. Did he display a meaningful ability for introspection? Was the candidate able to put forward a credible weakness but mitigate it sensibly? And then overall impressions, demeanour, delivery, eye contact, etc. So James first.
Sure. So I thought he really came more alive in the second part of the interview. I thought he dealt with everything pretty well, apart from the written advocacy versus oral advocacy. But I think that kind of just showed, frankly, a bit of naivety on his part, which will disappear pretty quickly if he's recruited. He had a beautiful expression, which is experience is a powerful teacher, and I thought that really demonstrated that he had a great mindset for learning, and that's partly why I think one can forgive him his oral and written advocacy answer, because he'll get over that pretty quickly. So I think his mindset is really good. I was really impressed with him, actually. I thought he picked himself up.
Sorry, James, just to interrupt you for a second. Do you not think it's a fair point that not every judge has read, your skeletons or your written submissions every single time? That's not an unfair point. If anything, you might argue that's insightful.
I think that's a great point. It's just that you don't know which judge that you're going to get until you stand up on your feet. So I think you've got to go in there with the expectation that what's written matters. But I forgive him that, because he's at the start of the journey, and he'll learn that pretty quickly. He'll just need a judge or a client or a colleague in the chambers to turn around to him and say, look, what about this? Or you didn't deal with this in your written submission, and he'll learn very quickly. And he's got that learning mindset, so I don't mind that.
I agree. I think these questions are deliberately provocative, and that one got him. But I think in a way that many young pupillage candidates are enthusiastic about the prospect of pupillage would respond. I was particularly impressed with his answer about his BPTC mark. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think they're the sorts of issues that we need to take into account. And I would entirely agree with that, with the idea that it came alive a lot more in the second half of the interview.
I didn't understand his answer to that question. Was he saying that the financial year ending meant that he gave up on his exams?
Well, that's what I thought he was saying. I didn't think it was. I have to say, I didn't think it was a great answer. Anyway, Natasha.
I think he did display a meaningful ability for introspection. I think his answer to that, and the fact that he thinks he should have argued the other side of the debate, was a good one. I was particularly concerned about what he had said about written advocacy. I think his argument that oral advocacy is more important is fine, but I think it was when it got to the end and he sort of said that people don't really read it anyway, suggesting that it's not really that important at all, was quite concerning. You have to remember that this is someone who, in his CV, he says he drafts arguments. So although you may want to lend some naivety to him, he's actually out there representing people and doing that written advocacy right now. So we would hope that he would understand the importance of it, even at this stage. In terms of his the overall impressions, I think he wasn't as fluid in this part as he was in the first part of the interview, and I've marked him down because of that. I think in terms of the weaknesses and strength of his application, I think the answer to that was fine.
Thanks, Natasha. Ruth?
Yeah, again, he was much better, much more lively at this part of the interview. I believe, and I've just flicked back to his CV, he has been a fee-earning paralegal at the time he was doing his BPTC. So I guess he assumed we would fill in the dots when he talked about it being towards the end of the financial year. I'm guessing he had work deadlines, and rightly or wrongly, he chose to prioritize work over some of his electives. If we'd have had more time, maybe I would have followed up with a question just to quantify that. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that it was something to do with work pressures rather than him just choosing to neglect some of his modules. Again, working full-time and studying whilst doing the BPTC, I have to give him extra marks for that anyway. He's clearly personable. He's clearly already dealing with clients, and I think his CV is quite impressive. And again, he answered well when I asked him the question about his competence on the BPTC, because the rest of his academic background is very strong.
I just want to say, I know it's not strictly my and I'm having another go, but I think that point that Ruth's made about him working through his course is such an important one. That shows real resilience, and those are the kinds of qualities that people here need.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, on the one hand, I thought he must have known that question was going to come, and I thought he had a bad answer to it, but his academics otherwise are so good that whatever the reason was, I don't think it alters my impression of him on that. Right, who did I miss out? Laura?
Yeah, I thought he did a lot better, as did most people. And one of the things I'm thinking is with the deficiencies in his arguments in the debate, we have to remember we have got the in-house advocacy programme and skills like that he can work and develop on. But simply being able to answer those questions well, I think is something that's more of a natural ability. I noted down 2 specific answers that I've sort of weighed up for and against when I was marking it. I thought he gave a really good answer about how he would cope under pressure. And he was saying once he'd done something once, he's then able to do it a lot easier, particularly if he were to come into an area such as crime. It is quite true. We all know that once you've done a couple of bail applications, you really do get the hang of it. Unfortunately, I thought the point about saying that judges don't read skeleton arguments was actually quite insulting. Given that barristers become judges, it was almost as though he was saying he doesn't have a lot of faith in our profession, and some of us may well go on to be judges one day. So I don't know if he meant it tongue-in-cheek, if it was meant to be a joke, but actually I don't think that was an appropriate answer.
And Saha?
Yeah, I think he was better. That seems to be the consensus. Although I hear what Natasha said. I've written, underlined, circled, put an asterisk next to experience as a powerful teacher, because I think that really was a solid answer. He's mature for where he's at, and yeah, across the board, it wasn't exceptional, but it was better than the first section.
I mean, my only concern, I really do think that his answer as to civil and written and oral advocacy was pretty worrying. I mean, even from a criminal practitioner's standpoint, it sort of implies that we never put anything down on paper. And to be applying to a mixed set that does the mix of work we do, I thought showed a terrible lack of judgment. As did the question about the Pupillage Award, but I forgive him that because that's just youthful inexperience. But I generally thought he did well, but that question really worried me. But
I'm going to disagree with you certainly on the Pupillage Award, because I think if people do have genuine financial concerns, then they ought to be allowed to raise them. And if we take offence at that, that's really our issue rather than theirs. I think it showed courage and openness that he felt comfortable raising that.
Yeah, can I just interject from an equality and diversity perspective? I think we shouldn't really be taking that into consideration because we don't know his financial background and we don't know the reasons as to why he may ask a question like that. So I don't really think the answer to that question need necessarily weigh in upon our decision about the rest of the interview.
All right, well, that's me told. I think you're probably right. Should we just do the scores on the second part then? So James first.
I gave him an 18.
And Francis.
I gave him 20.
Laura.
17.
Ruth.
I think we might have difficulties with Sahar and Ruth.
Yeah. Let's try Natasha.
Well, I gave him a 13.
And Sahar and Ruth, we're going to have to get them to text theirs, I think. I gave him quite low on that as well. I thought 13 as well. Right.
One thing I'm a little bit worried about, though, is, of course, from the E&D perspective, we should not judge him asking about the Pupillage Awards as part of our criteria. But I don't want this to come out as a message to candidates that they can ask that sort of question in an interview. Because I have a feeling that it might,
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I don't think it will, because I thought he came across as rude and it was inappropriate, and I think we can all see that. But were somebody to, I don't want somebody to think that it carte blanche, they're not allowed to ask about finances if it really is an issue. Do you see what I mean?
I don't think it is rude at all. It might be ill judged.
Not the question. I think the way he said it.
But
I think he was doing deliberately. But I think it is an appropriate question. He just did it in an interesting manner.
I thought the answer that you gave, Paul, was brilliant.
Yeah, really good.
I'm trying to buy you off. Don't listen.
Sahar on speaker. He is trying to rejoin, but he can hear us, so we can continue the discussion.
Hi guys, yeah, I've heard everything. As I said, I gave him 20 for that section.
Right. So, and I think we've got a message through from Ruth that it was I think she gave 15, and her face isn't moving, so I think that's probably so. The position is. Let me just add those scores up. Right, so as you know, we're awarding 2 pupillages this year, and the applicant we saw last night has scored higher than. There was one we saw last night who's got a far higher score than everybody, and we probably all remember her. So she definitely, that makes it a bit easier for her. She definitely gets one of our places. So the decision we've got to make tonight is between Roshan and the other applicant we saw, female applicant we saw last night, which was, I can't remember her name, Miss Bloggs, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, Miss Bloggs is right.
It was, yeah. And they are both, so Roshan and Miss Bloggs are on an identical total, actually. They obviously differ slightly in part 1 and part 2, but they both score overall an average of 20. So what do we do about that? Who wants to go first?
Well, I mean, I remember Miss Boggs quite well. In fact, I've got some of the details here, and I think she's better, isn't she, academically? And her oral presentation was good. I imagine she scored. I think she scored probably better on the first part. My thoughts really is just kind of stepping back and thinking, you know, about the makeup of chambers and kind of who we are and what we're like. And it's really about, you know, who's going to get on best with clients, because, you know, we run a commercial organization, and that kind of thing is important, isn't it? That's kind of what Chambers looks like, and you know, what our clients expect, and who's going to be more successful, I think, is important. So I don't know. I thought on that, Roshan kind of had when he came alive in the second part of the interview, I could really see someone who'd do well, you know, making contacts and forging good client relationships.
But if Roshan is someone who would not take drafting very seriously, which is an important task and a frequent task that as a pupil he'll be undertaking, are we worried that his work product is actually going to be worse than hers?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we should tend away from sort of hypotheticals and making decisions about who would get on with clients better, because we don't know that. But what we do know is that she performed better in the debate.
Oh, she did perform better in the debate, but performed overall as well. And I think we've predominantly praised Roshan for the more engaging performance in the second half of the interview, and those questions are as relevant as the debate. They carry the same score.
Ruth?
I agree that there has to be some kind of differentiator. We've got the marking system for a reason. They've got the same amount of marks. I don't think it's fair to say that Miss Bloggs did better in the first half, because the reality is, whether she did better in the first half or not, they've still got the exact same mark.
Saha, are you still on the line?
It seems to me that there might be an easy fix. Might be an easy fix here, and that if we look at the overall makeup of Chambers, we're slightly male heavy. So, I mean, is that not something that falls for consideration?
Can I just strongly advise against doing that? It's not fair just to award it based on gender. So there must be another way that we can differentiate. I don't know how the rest of the panel feel, but I certainly wouldn't feel appropriate doing that.
No, I don't think we can do that. I mean, my feeling was that, I mean, I like them both, but you know, fundamentally, Miss Bloggs did better had better academics, although there wasn't much in that. It's really just she did better at bar school. He got a first, so did she. But she was much better in part one, which is really what we're looking for in a barrister, the ability to argue. But I agree. I agree with James. Roshan was quite smooth in the second part. James, you want to say something?
Yes, I think on academics, we've got to keep in mind that he was working during his bar course. I think we've got to keep that in mind.
Does that not also carry the equality and diversity element?
I think it's difficult because we didn't really delve into it. I don't think it's something we can hold against her, but I certainly think it's something we can give credit to him for. But I don't think that would be appropriate as a differentiating factor. I don't know.
All right. Well, look. Sorry.
The other thing I wanted to say was, I know we don't normally do this, but whether exceptionally, because we've got a draw and we're finding it challenging making a decision, is whether we invite them again for some other process that will help us differentiate. That's another.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure we can do that. We set out the process they had to go through. I mean, we've had a long night of interviews. We've made the decision on place one. We know that who it's between. I don't think there's any harm in sleeping on it. We've put all the marks down. Should we do that and perhaps have a Zoom call tomorrow just to make the final decision, reflect on it, on everything we've seen?
I agree with that, and I think the other point is that obviously we have reserve lists. Person one may refuse to get an offer elsewhere, and so we may not have to make that decision ultimately between Roshan and Miss Bloggs. So I agree with sleeping on it and coming back to it afresh.
I agree as well, although I have an uncomfortable feeling that Roshan is still online and has heard all of this. Time will tell, I suppose.
Roshan's internet connection's better than yours.
Yeah.
All right then. Well, thank you everybody, and we'll resume in the morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.